Hello, welcome to another episode of Forgotten Cemeteries, Pacific Northwest. Today we're in Buzan Cemetery, located in Dead Dog Canyon, though I guess it technically could be Bakeoven or Shaniko. We're in lovely Oregon today, in the gunslinging rowdy Wasco County. Alternative names, Flanagan, Lindley, and Royal Dale. So let's go meet some local residents and hear their story. A little history about this cemetery. It has a start date of 1902. A little late for our taste, but cool stories here. Find a grave shows around 52 memorials. Probably the best description I read online was from cemetery explorer Johan Matheson. An open acre alongside a little used road between nowhere and the other side of it. Very accurate. You definitely feel alone out here. The birds are out though. Sadly, I just learned that that cemetery explorer passed away. So Johan, apologies on pronunciation. If you're out there watching me fumble through this documentary on the cemetery, thanks for the cemetery resources and guidance. Not sure you'll know how much you helped me with this channel. I'll link some of his books below. He wrote some pretty cool cemetery books that were helpful to me. Bakeoven, Oregon was nothing more than an old barn with a bake oven sign when I passed it down the road. However, it does have an interesting backstory. My geographic name guide states, during pioneer gold excitement in Canyon City, a trader started from the Dalles with a packed train of flour. After crossing the Deschutes River, Indians drove off his horses in the night and left him with his supplies. He constructed a rough clay and stone-baked oven and made bread, which he sold to the miners. So, cool mini story for this area if you're interested. There apparently was a post office here in 1875 with Mrs. Ellen Burgess being the first postmaster in Bakeoven, which ended in 1913. Couldn't find any origins on the naming of Dead Dog Canyon. I did read pioneers ate their dogs when times were rough, so hopefully it's not named after that. If you travel out here, you'll most likely pass through the ghost town of Shaniko, among the other weird locations along this lonesome highway. Today, we'll meet two Civil War veterans, learn why Civil War prisons were the last place you want to be during the war, and apologies ahead of time for graphic images, FYI. We'll meet our first pioneer veterinarian, stop by a man's headstone who had terrible marriage luck, hear of the famous quarantine in Bloody Island in St. Louis, Missouri, with one of our local residents also meeting his demise in 1922 in the mountains of Oregon during a winter storm, and also learn about the hookworm life cycle during the Civil War. Should be fun. And finally, learn of a gun duelist's brilliant idea that backfires, literally. One of the older birth years in the cemetery belongs to John G. Bleakney. Born in 1832 in Indiana County, Pennsylvania, and a Civil War veteran, he served in the 12th and 19th Illinois Infantry Regiments, with the 12th being nicknamed the 1st Scotch Regiment, primarily because a large portion of their soldiers were Scottish immigrants from Chicago. Those regiments would see action at the Battle of Atlanta, Bentonville, Shiloh, Stones River, and the Second Battle of Corinth in 1862. At the end of the Civil War, he would marry a woman in Illinois named Martha Bellows Bleakney, who died in 1928 in Portland. Strangely enough, her burial details are unknown, but her death certificate says buried in Shaniko, so maybe she's here? I'm not really sure. Regardless, John and Martha are 1870 arrivals in the Marion County, Oregon, and John served as a representative of the Oregon legislature. They didn't move to Wasco County until 1889. As most of you have probably seen, he was a member of the Oddfellows with the iconic FLT at the head of his headstone at the top. That stands for Friendship, Love, and Truth. GAR, stamped at the bottom of his headstone, stands for the Grand Army of the Republic, an organization back then composed of Civil War veterans. So, pretty busy and eventful life for this stop. I did purchase a book called People of Shaniko, and the details about John are in there. Late arrival for our channel, but John J. Wilson was born in 1847, Missouri. Ouch. His obituary mentions in the year of his death in 1930, he came to Oregon around 1900 and something. Talk about bad luck. His first wife, Mary Jane Phillips Wilson, back in the Midwest, died while giving childbirth, and her burial details are unknown, somewhere in Illinois in 1890s from my readings. He would marry a second time to a woman named Lucia Jane Smallwood, but got divorced in 1900, but then she ends up getting struck by a train in 1903 at the age of 57, dying. When arriving in Shaniko, Oregon, a town east of here, John was a widow with 7 children. I guess housing was difficult to find. I mean, when you'll see during the tours, still miles of nothing. With that said, some of John's children lived with someone in Bourbon, a town most likely gone in Sherman County. If you're in the old ghost towns and abandoned places, this entire area is for you, by the way. One of John's daughters, Rosetta Wilson, apparently didn't like the harsh winters, hot-ass summers, and the plethora of rattlesnakes out here. Hope I don't find one. So they moved to Portland. It's kind of ironic. People move out to settings like these to get away from it all these days. Our last stop describes not only how harsh it was to live out here, but in the 1800s as well. I couldn't honestly find much on the Buzans, but I did read a tidbit that Frank here came out with his parents in Oregon in 1901, Jerome and Francis. I also read that Frank's grandparents both died in Missouri during the 1866 epidemic. Keep in mind the Civil War is coming to a close. There's a lot of individuals in the country who were like relocating during this time. Oregon and California being hotspots, obviously, for settlement. St. Louis was a hotspot as well, and during 1866, cholera was spreading to major cities, with New York being first on the list. Then it went to Detroit, then to Cincinnati, and St. Louis's time was up. In fact, it was such a concern that the city of St. Louis was considering a few islands for quarantining individuals, one of which was referred to as Bloody Island, named for a spot for duelists to settle disputes, because it was considered net neutral territory and not under Missouri or Illinois' control, so go to town on each other. One of the most famous duels was between Thomas Biddle and Spencer Darwin Pettis. Due to some duel codes, Thomas Biddle got to decide the rules of engagement. He chose 5 feet, and the reason being he was nearsighted, and he honestly thought Pettis wouldn't go through with the duel due to the unique request at such a close distance to fire off guns during the duel. However, Spencer Pettis said, "Bring it on." Upon firing at 5 feet, both men were killed. Apparently 2,000 people witnessed the duel. So I guess you could say Biddle's idea backfired. Get it? Backfired? Never mind. Back to Quarantine Island, as it was called. The city of St. Louis would purchase it and change the name to Arsenal Island in 1866. Buildings were constructed on the island, of them being military hospitals and another being a smallpox hospital. The mayor seemed pretty proud during his visit based on one article I read. He visited in April in 1866. However, the article also describes a health inspector's visit in July of 1866, stating that visitors left horrified by conditions and the stench. Filth had accumulated and spit trays have not been emptied for many days. The report mentions that many had to flee the door just for fresh air. Later that year, inspectors came back to discover worse conditions, if you can believe that. Bed bug infestations and random insects crawling up the walls. To add, released patients were not rewarded with clean clothes. They were given the rags they came with. One inspector states that he compared the island to capital punishment in ancient Rome. Back to Frank here. In December of 1922, he was looking after a camp in the mountains. Strangely, Frank's dogs return home, but Frank doesn't, giving concern. A search party went out looking for him and found that he most likely got lost in the winter storm and froze to death. He was only 36 years old when he died. That cool book I bought, Shaniko People, has a brief mention of Zella Buzan on the left here. She was a school teacher in Shaniko back then. Our last stop is the headstone of George Harvey, born in my home state of Ohio in 1840. He is also a Civil War veteran serving in Company C of the 20th Iowa Volunteer Infantry. His write-up mentions that he grew up in Greene County, Wisconsin, however, on a farm and in the lead mines. Coincidentally, there is a lead mines, Wisconsin. Not much on it, except present day there's zinc and lead soil contamination in 4 Wisconsin counties, Greene County being one of them. George would head to Iowa in 1859, and this is where his Civil War journey starts. The 20th Iowa would see action at the Battle of Prairie Grove, Vicksburg, Brownsville, and Mustang Island. His write-up mentions that he fought in quite a list of battles. However, with that exposure comes risk. He would be captured in Arkansas and taken out of the hospital and imprisoned for 6 weeks. As discussed in previous videos, a Civil War prison is the last place you want to be during this time. Mortality rates were very high on both the Union and Confederate sides, especially the Confederate prisons, which severely lacked medicine, doctors, and food. Because of this, Northern Union supporters were vocal, demanding that Confederate soldiers in Union prisons get equal treatment. It led to terrible conditions, and apologies on the Union soldier prisoner pic I'm about to post in the video, but I think this hits home and relates to George here, who himself was in pretty bad state when he was released from the prison. Lauren Foote, a professor of history, wrote, "The suffering of prisoners did more to inhibit post-war reconciliation than any other episode of the war. Andersonville Confederate Civil War prison was the worst of the worst. Of the 45,000 prisoners, 13,000 died at sight in Georgia. Fresh prisoners often were horrified and felt they arrived at hell, seeing walking skeletons of men. At the helm of the camp was Commander Henry Wirtz. This camp suffered from overcrowding, lack of food and water, even for their own Confederate soldiers, let alone prisoners, disease, and above all, medical supplies. Reports of the entire camp full of sick and dying men's fecal matter was frequent. One doctor, in fact, was asked to investigate why there's so many deaths at Andersonville prison. What's going on down there? He thought it was due to a vitamin deficiency. However, current historians suspect it was hookworm infections, a disease not known or recognized during Civil War times. As you can see here, the life cycle of the hookworm involves feces. Remember the camp conditions, constant exposure to the disease. Henry Wirtz, head of the camp, did petition his superior for more support, obviously identifying the conditions were beyond out of control at Andersonville prison. At the close of the Civil War, however, Wirtz would be captured and put on trial for basically everything related to endangering the lives of Union soldier prisoners. He was found guilty of 10 out of 13 charges and sentenced to death by hanging. He was read his death warrant, and on November 10th, 1865, at 10:32 a.m., Wirtz was hanged. His neck did not break at first, however, from the trapdoor fall, and 200 spectators and 120 soldiers watched as he writhed and slowly strangled to death. He is buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery. Upon his headstone, it reads, "Confederate hero, make what you will of it." Rewinding a few years prior to Wirtz's hanging, I read in 1862 Union General John E. Wool and Confederate General Hal Cobb would meet up to discuss prisoner exchanges due to public concerns and outcries, given what we just learned about prison camp conditions. Progress was slow, of course, and it wasn't moving much at all, but finally John Adams Dix and Daniel Harvey Hill would take over the process, thus creating the Dix-Hill deal. However, the deal would fall apart just a year later in 1863 as Confederates refused to release black prison soldiers, claiming they probably belonged to their masters anyways, not the Union Army. In all of this, U.S. Grant knew that the South needed prisoner exchanges more than the North. He would oppose prisoner exchanges and offered imprisoned Confederate soldiers the option to fight for the North. These guys would be known as the galvanized Yankees. Anyways, back to George here. In 1872, he would move to Iowa and purchase a ton of land building structures, and apparently did so well, he bought even more land. Strange note, I guess his health wasn't doing that great in 1874, so he made a career change, and we may be looking at one of our rare pioneer veterinarians here. He previously was dabbling in animal care and treatment, thus he practiced veterinary surgery and established an infirmary for sick and lame animals. From there, I'm not sure how he spent his final days. I do see he died in Bakeoven in 1915 and married a Caroline, but other than that, dude led an epic life full of Civil War battles, imprisonment, and appears to finish out his career caring for sick and injured animals, giving them a second life. Alright, time for the tour. Should be short. I don't think this one's on Google Maps. I think you gotta do the thing where you go to find a grave, pull the GPS coordinate, and then plug it in. So, well, if you're driving along this very quiet, lonesome road, I would just look for the American flag on the side of the road. It's pretty noticeable. That would be the cemetery. Interesting one. I wonder if that used to be upright. Did buy a new GoPro. The other one was acting weird. GoPro 11. And I'll tell you what, battery usage has not improved at all. They lied. These things suck down batteries pretty quick. They're made for action in their defense, so they're probably trying to cool and using a bunch of battery. I don't know. But we'll see how performance is when I go home and look at the video. Hopefully it looks nice. Allegedly supposed to be better. Allegedly. But another cemetery with plenty of room. You're looking to get buried in the middle of nowhere. Anywho, hope you enjoyed this quick visit. Loaded with stories, actually, so I hope you enjoyed those. Sorry for graphic images with the Civil War, but hey, that's history from the 1800s. Thanks for watching. Hope you're doing good. Hang in there. It's almost fall. Summer's over. And have a good one. Looking at the cattle over there, they're kind of curious what I'm doing. Later.